Emma had never imagined her life would take such a dark turn. Just a few years ago things had been different. Not perfect but manageable. At 36, she had already weathered her fair share of storms. Her marriage to Liam had ended, but unlike the bitter divorces she had heard about, theirs was civil, amicable even. There was no screaming, no dragging each other through court. They had simply grown apart, and for the sake of their son Mason they chose peace over war. Mason, her world. At just 10 years old, he was the reason she got up every morning, the reason she kept pushing forward. His bright smile had a way of making everything seem okay, even when it wasn't. After the divorce, Emma kept their home in the quiet suburbs. It wasn't extravagant, but it was safe, warm. A place where Mason could still feel like a kid. The walls were covered in his artwork, and his laughter often echoed through the halls. But outside the comfort of her home, the weight of family expectations pressed down on her. Her relationship with her half-sister, Grace, had always been complicated. They weren't close, how could they be? Emma had built her life from the ground up, working tirelessly to give Mason a stable future. Grace, on the other hand, had always expected things to be handed to her. And their mother, she made it clear who she favored. Emma had tried time and time again to bridge the gap, but the unspoken resentment in Grace's eyes told her that nothing would ever be enough, and perhaps it never had been. Despite everything, Emma had a small source of financial security, a rental apartment that brought in extra income. It wasn't much, but it helped. It was the safety net that allowed her to focus on Mason's needs. And yet, every family gathering, every phone call with her mother, carried the same undertone: Grace needs help. Grace is struggling. Grace should have what you have. Emma's grip tightened on her phone the day she received the news that would change everything. Her grandmother, the woman who had once been her refuge from the chaos of family politics, had passed away. And in her will, she had left Emma something no one had expected: the family home. The news didn't just shake Emma. It shattered the fragile balance she had been trying to maintain with her family. The inheritance should have been a blessing, but instead it became a curse. The moment the will was read, she could feel the shift in the room. The looks exchanged, the sharp inhale from her mother, the way Grace's expression darkened. "That house should go to Grace," their mother had said, her voice firm, her eyes cold. "She needs it more than you do." Emma had been too stunned to respond at first. She had spent years playing the role of the responsible daughter, the one who never asked for much, who worked hard and never complained. And yet, here she was, expected to give away the one thing that had been left to her. She had tried to reason with them. She had tried to explain that Mason came first, that she couldn't just give up something so valuable. But her words fell on deaf ears. It wasn't a request, it was a demand disguised as family duty. And so, standing in the middle of that suffocating room, under the heavy weight of expectation, Emma realized something chilling. She would never be enough for them. Emma stood frozen in the dimly lit hallway, the weight of her past pressing against her chest like an iron grip. She had spent years running, escaping the shadows of betrayal, deceit, and heartbreak. And now fate had led her back to the very place she swore she would never return, her childhood home. But it was no longer the warm sanctuary she remembered. It was a house filled with ghosts, whispers of old secrets lurking in every corner, echoes of laughter long since silenced. As she stepped inside, the air was thick with memories both bitter and sweet. The scent of aged wood and faint traces of her mother's perfume still clung to the walls, evoking a deep ache in her soul. She had left everything behind, hoping time would erase the pain, but instead, it had only allowed the wounds to fester. And now she had no choice but to face them. Her return had not gone unnoticed. Standing at the top of the grand staircase was Mason, her estranged brother. His eyes, once full of warmth, now held only suspicion and hurt. He was no longer the carefree boy who had once defended her against the world. He was a man hardened by disappointment, by abandonment. "You shouldn't have come back," he said, his voice cold and distant. Emma swallowed the lump in her throat, forcing herself to hold his gaze. "I had no choice," she murmured. "I need answers." A bitter chuckle escaped Mason's lips. "Answers? After all these years? You think you can just waltz in here and demand explanations?" His voice was sharp, laced with anger and something deeper. something raw. But Emma knew she had no time to waste. What happened that night, Mason? The night everything fell apart. Her voice wavered, but she refused to back down. She had spent years piecing together fragments of truth, but something had always been missing, and she was done living in the dark. Mason descended the staircase slowly, each step deliberate, as if measuring his words before he spoke. You want the truth? Fine. But you might regret hearing it. He led her to their father's old study, a place that once held the scent of leather-bound books and the quiet hum of wisdom. But now it felt suffocating, a tomb of forgotten secrets. Mason opened a drawer and pulled out a worn, yellowed envelope. This was never meant to reach you, he admitted, handing it to her. Emma's hands trembled as she took the envelope, her pulse hammering in her ears. She recognized the handwriting instantly, her mother's delicate script. With a deep breath, she unfolded the letter, her eyes scanning the words that would shatter everything she thought she knew. My dearest Emma, if you are reading this, then the truth has finally found you. I tried to protect you from it, but some fates cannot be escaped. The night you left, I made a choice that cost us everything. Your father's sins were deeper than you ever knew, and I was too weak to stand against them. But you were always strong. That's why I had to send you away. To keep you safe. To keep you from becoming like him. But I know now that secrets have a way of unraveling, no matter how tightly they are woven. If Mason has given you this letter, then he is ready to forgive. And I pray that you can too. Love always, Mother. Tears blurred Emma's vision as the weight of the words settled over her. Her mother had known. She had known all along. And she had sacrificed everything to shield Emma from the same darkness that had consumed their father. But at what cost? She looked up at Mason, her breath shallow. Why didn't you tell me? His expression softened, years of resentment melting away. Because I blamed you. I blamed you for leaving, for not seeing what was happening. But I was wrong. I see that now. Emma closed her eyes for a moment, letting the pain settle. The truth had freed her, but it had also bound her to the past in a way she had never imagined. There was no undoing the years of silence, but perhaps there was still time to mend what had been broken. As she folded the letter, she made a silent promise to herself. She would uncover the rest of the truth, no matter where it led. Because for the first time in years she was no longer running. She was ready to face the ghosts. The cold night air was thick with tension as Mason stood in the dimly lit hallway, his hands clenched into fists. Across from him, Patricia's face was etched with a mixture of betrayal and fear. The truth had finally unraveled, and now there was no turning back. Diana had been the one to uncover it. She had spent countless nights piecing together fragments of information, chasing whispers of a secret that had remained buried for too long. Her suspicions had been brushed off at first. Mason was a man of integrity, a devoted husband, a loving father. But something had always felt off. The inconsistencies in his stories, the late nights at work, the hushed phone calls. And then the final nail in the coffin, Amanda's confession. Amanda had been racked with guilt for weeks, torn between loyalty to Mason and the undeniable weight of the truth. She had tried to keep it to herself, tried to convince herself that it was not her place to interfere. But when Diana confronted her, when she looked into her eyes with a desperate plea for honesty, Amanda couldn't lie anymore. She told Diana everything. Mason's betrayal was deeper than they had imagined. It wasn't just an affair, wasn't just fleeting moments of indiscretion. It was a calculated deception that had spanned years. He had built an entire life in the shadows, a web of lies so intricate that even he had started to believe in them. Patricia, his wife, had been oblivious, trusting him without question. But now, as she stood before him, the realization hit her like a tidal wave. The man she had loved, the man she had shared a life with, was a stranger. You lied to me. Patricia's voice was barely above a whisper, but the weight of her words crushed the air between them. Mason's eyes darted to Diana, then to Amanda, searching for an escape, an excuse, anything that could undo what had just happened. But there was no escape. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Mason finally spoke, his voice hoarse. I never wanted to hurt you. Patricia let out a bitter laugh. But you did. You didn't just hurt me, Mason. You destroyed everything. In the corner of the room, Mira stood frozen, her young mind struggling to comprehend the chaos unfolding before her. She had always looked up to her father, idolized him, but now the image she had built in her mind was crumbling, replaced by the painful reality of who he truly was. Diana stepped forward, her gaze sharp and unwavering. You don't get to play the victim, Mason. You made your choices. You knew exactly what you were doing. Mason exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. You think I don't regret it? You think I don't hate myself for this? But you still did it, Amanda interjected, her voice laced with disappointment. And now we all have to live with the consequences. The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia's hands trembled as she reached for Mira, pulling her close, shielding her from the man she once trusted more than anyone. The weight of betrayal was suffocating, pressing down on everyone in the room. Mason took a step forward, but Patricia flinched. That single movement shattered any hope he had left. The walls were closing in and he knew. He had lost them. All of them. Tears welled in Mason's eyes, but no one moved to comfort him. No one offered him solace. He had made his bed and now he had to lie in it. As the clock ticked on, Mason realized that this was it. The end of the life he had so carefully constructed. The family he had taken for granted was slipping away, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Patricia inhaled deeply, steadying herself. Get out, she said, her voice firm. We're done. And just like that, Mason's world collapsed around him. He had no choice but to walk away, leaving behind the wreckage of his own making. And as he stepped out into the cold, empty night, the reality of his loneliness sank in. This was the price of betrayal, and he had paid it in full. The night was heavy with tension. Patricia stood in the dimly lit hallway, her heart pounding like a war drum against her ribs. She could hear the low murmur of voices from the other side of the door, but it was Mason's voice that made her freeze. There was a sharp edge to it, a quiet but unmistakable fury. Diana, standing beside her, placed a firm hand on her arm. Are you sure about this? She whispered. Once we go in, there's no turning back. Patricia swallowed hard and nodded. We need to know the truth. With a deep breath, she pushed open the door. The room was dim, lit only by a flickering desk lamp. Mason stood at the center, his broad shoulders tense, his face a mask of unreadable emotions. Across from him sat Amanda, her eyes shadowed with something between defiance and regret. And next to her, Mira, her face pale but resolute. Mason's jaw clenched as he turned to face them. So you're here too. Patricia took a step forward. We need answers. Amanda exhaled slowly. You think you want the truth, but I don't think you're ready for it. Diana scoffed. Enough with the riddles, Amanda. We deserve to know. Mira, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. It was never supposed to be this way. Her voice trembled slightly. We never meant to drag you into this. Patricia's patience was wearing thin. Drag us into what exactly? Amanda shot a sharp glance at Mason, but he simply crossed his arms and said nothing. It was clear that whatever secrets they were holding, they had carried them for far too long. Finally, Amanda leaned forward, her voice hushed but steady. The reason why everything has been falling apart, why people have been lying, hiding, and running, it all traces back to one decision. One mistake. Diana's breath hitched. Whose mistake? Amanda hesitated, then looked directly at Mason. Ours. The room fell into a suffocating silence. Patricia felt a chill creep up her spine. This was worse than she had imagined. Mason's fists clenched at his sides. We thought we were protecting everyone. Mira's voice was barely above a whisper. But we were only delaying the inevitable. Patricia's mind was racing. Protecting us from what? Amanda's expression hardened. From the truth. From the past. From the kind of consequences you can't undo. Diana shook her head. No more games, Amanda. Just tell us. Amanda inhaled sharply, her fingers gripping the edge of the desk. Years ago, a choice was made that set this all in motion. We covered up something that should have come to light a long time ago. But now the past is clawing its way back. Patricia felt her stomach drop. The weight of Amanda's words was suffocating. What did you cover up? Amanda looked at Mason once more. He was the one who finally broke. A betrayal, he admitted. And it's about to destroy everything. Silence crashed over them like a tidal wave. Patricia could barely breathe. Whatever they had uncovered, it was only the beginning. The rain pounded relentlessly against the city's glass towers, streaking down like unrelenting tears from the heavens. Inside a dimly lit office, Amanda sat motionless, her fingers clenched around a letter that trembled in her grasp. The words burned into her mind, each sentence a dagger to her already wounded heart. Your actions have caused irreparable damage to this company. Effective immediately, you are terminated. The letter from the board was cold and precise, devoid of any sympathy. Amanda felt the walls closing in around her. The empire she had built from the ground up was slipping through her fingers like sand in a storm. How had it come to this? Just weeks ago, she had been at the peak of her career, praised for her ruthless decision-making and strategic brilliance. She had always believed that power was secured through dominance, that survival in the corporate world meant crushing the competition before they had the chance to do the same to her. But now, as she sat alone in her office, stripped of her title, she realized how empty her victories had been. A knock on the door startled her. It was Mira, her former assistant, the one person she had never bothered to acknowledge beyond giving orders. Mira held out a cup of coffee, her expression unreadable. "I thought you might need this," she said simply. Amanda hesitated before taking it. "You knew, didn't you?" she whispered. "That they were planning to push me out." Mira sighed. "Yes, but you never listened. You never trusted anyone enough to warn you." Amanda felt the weight of those words settle deep in her chest. She had prided herself on being self-sufficient, on needing no one. But in the end, that very mindset had isolated her, had made her blind to the shifting tides around her. She had dismissed loyalty as weakness, compassion as a liability. Her mind drifted back to the past, to the countless employees she had discarded without a second thought, to the partners she had betrayed for a temporary advantage. She had believed that fear commanded respect. But now, as she stared at the empty office that had once been filled with ambition and energy, she saw the truth. Fear had only bought her silence and distance. The moment she was no longer useful, she had been cast aside just as easily as she had done to others. She took a deep breath, her hands tightening around the coffee cup. There was no undoing the past, but perhaps there was still time to change. "Mira," she said, looking up. "If you were in my position, what would you do?" Mira studied her for a moment before replying. "I would start by making amends. Not because it'll fix everything, but because it's the right thing to do." Amanda nodded slowly. She had spent years building walls, fortifying herself against betrayal. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to start tearing them down. Power and success built on fear and manipulation are never permanent. True leadership isn't about crushing others. It's about lifting them up. Amanda's downfall serves as a stark reminder that respect, trust, and genuine connections are worth more than any title or fortune. In life, the way we treat others will always come back to us, for better or worse. And when everything else is stripped away, the only thing that truly remains is the impact we've had on the people around us.